The knock on the door was sharp, impatient. Nothing like the way my son used to tap as a child when he came in from the garden with muddy shoes. Damien and his wife, Celeste, swept into the house as if they owned it. Celeste clutched a sleek leather folder against her chest, her heels clicking across Richard's polished hardwood floor. "Mother," Damien said. His voice clipped. "We need your signature. It's just a refinancing form. Nothing complicated." Celeste slid the folder onto the dining table, her manicured finger pointing to a line at the bottom. My stomach twisted when I saw it already carried what looked like my handwriting. "This isn't mine," I said quietly, my finger tracing the unfamiliar scrawl. "How could my name be here before I've even touched it?" Celeste's smile froze at the edges. "A draft," she explained too quickly. "The notary must have made a copy error. Richard had been a banker for 40 years, and he taught me to read documents carefully, to trust my instincts when numbers or signatures felt wrong." I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "No," I said. Damien's jaw tightened. He picked up the folder and slammed it shut. "You're being ridiculous. This is for the good of the family. You've lived off this house long enough without contributing." I stared at him. The boy I'd once soothed through fevers and heartbreaks, now glaring at me like an intruder. When I didn't move, his voice cracked into fury. "If you won't help, then you don't belong here. Get out, you're nothing here." He hauled my suitcase, already packed from a recent trip, to the porch and dropped it with a thud that echoed down the street. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out. Celeste lingered behind him, smirking as though victory was hers, though I caught the tremor in her eyes. I walked down the steps, my hands trembling but my back straight. The air outside bit colder than usual, or perhaps it was only the hollow ache inside me. I turned once toward the house Richard built, then forced myself to keep walking, suitcase wheels rattling over the uneven sidewalk, toward a night I knew would be darker than any before. I dragged my suitcase up the narrow stairwell of a basement unit in Burlington, the kind of place I never imagined I would call home. The landlady handed me the key with barely a glance, and when I stepped inside, the air hit me damp, tinged with mildew, heavy enough to settle in my chest. The cracked linoleum in the kitchen curled at the edges, and a single window looked out at ground level, offering nothing more than a view of passing feet and car tires. I set down my bag and sat on the sagging mattress. My fingers brushed against the quilt I had stitched with Richard years ago, a patchwork of blues and greens now faded with time. For a moment, I closed my eyes and heard his voice again, soft but steady. "If they ever betray you, trust that I've prepared something." I clung to that memory in the silence that followed. Days bled into nights with no call from Damien, no knock at the door. My phone buzzed once, a message from Celeste. "Enjoy your freedom, old woman. Don't expect us to call." I stared at the words until they blurred, then deleted them. The cruelty was deliberate, but so was my choice not to respond, to make ends meet. I took shifts at a small bakery on Main Street. The smell of fresh bread gave me comfort, though the hours left my body aching. I smiled at customers, tucked away the tips, and counted pennies at night to be sure I could cover rent. Still, beneath the grief and humiliation, a thin strand of defiance held. They thought they had erased me, but I was still here. I would endure, as I always had. One night, as I lay listening to the pipes groan in the walls, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Alden Gaines, the family attorney. My hand trembled as I answered, his voice urgent and strained. The phone's shrill ring cut through the stillness of my basement apartment, making me jolt upright. The clock glowed, 11:44 p.m. My first thought was something terrible had happened, an accident. A hospital. But when I glanced at the screen, the name made my heart lurch in a different way. Alden Gaines. I hesitated before answering. The family attorney had not spoken to me since Richard's funeral 2 years earlier, when he handed me envelopes and shook my hand with polite finality. Mrs. Marrow. His voice came through low and urgent. I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but it cannot wait. Certain provisions of Richard's estate have been triggered by your son's actions. You need to come to my office tomorrow morning. First thing, for a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Mr. Gaines, the estate was settled long ago. Everything was signed, everything distributed. What could possibly? Not over the phone, he interrupted. Firm but respectful. Trust me when I say it is in your best interest to be here. 9 o'clock. I'll clear my schedule. And then the line went dead. I sat frozen. Phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended. 100 questions crashed inside me, but none found solid ground. Triggered provisions. By Damien, I lay back down. But sleep would not come. Instead, I replayed the scene in my old dining room. Celeste's perfectly steady hands, except for that one tremor. When I caught the false signature, she had been desperate. Richard used to say her ambition outpaced her honesty, but I had brushed it aside as judgmental. Now, in the dark, I wondered if he had been right all along. I pulled Richard's quilt tighter over me, inhaling the faint scent of lavender still clinging to its seams. His voice seemed to echo in the hollow room. If they ever betray you, trust that I've prepared something. Morning light finally broke through the narrow window. Pale and weak, I rose, dressed, and set out for Gaines' office, my chest tight with dread, and something else, an ember of hope I had not felt in weeks. Mr. Gaines greeted me at the door of his office with a solemn nod, ushering me past the shelves of heavy law books into the inner chamber, where sunlight spilled across a long mahogany table. He gestured for me to sit. A folder lay before him, thicker than anything I had ever signed with Richard. Mrs. Marrow, he began, adjusting his glasses. Your husband was a cautious man. Before his passing, he created a supplemental will sealed until either your 65th birthday or, under darker circumstances, should you be forced from your home. My breath caught. Forced from my home. He nodded gravely. Richard foresaw the possibility of due friction with your son and daughter-in-law. He wanted to ensure you would never be left vulnerable. He opened the folder and spread the documents before me. My eyes raced over words that hardly seemed real. Richard had left me majority control of the family's timber business, $3.2 million in diversified investments, and the deed to our lake house in New Hampshire. I pressed my hand to my chest, the numbers staggering, but it was the final clause that stole my breath, a penalty provision. Any heir who mistreated me or attempted coercion would forfeit portions of their inheritance, redirected directly to me. The enormity of it sank in like a tide rushing to shore. Damien's words. Your nothing here hadn't just wounded me. They had triggered a chain reaction Richard had built years before. Tears welled in my eyes. Not of sorrow, but of vindication. Richard had known me, trusted me, believed in me even beyond his life. The humiliation of standing on that porch with my suitcase suddenly shifted into something else, strength. Mr. Gaines leaned forward. By law, I must notify the other heirs today. Damien and Celeste will learn of this immediately. I steadied myself, fingers brushing the embossed edge of Richard's signature on the page. For the first time since I left the house, I felt the ground firm beneath my feet. I left the office with Richard's foresight wrapped around me like armor, bracing for the storm I knew would come once the calls began. By the time I returned to my apartment that afternoon, my phone was buzzing like a hive. 10 missed calls, then 15, then 20, Damien's number flashing again and again. sometimes Celeste's, sometimes blocked. The first voicemails were sharp and commanding. "Mother, call me back immediately. You don't understand what you've done." Then, as the hours passed, their tone shifted into pleading, "Mom, we overreacted. Let's talk. Please." I set the phone face down on the counter and let it ring. Their desperation was confirmation enough. Richard's safeguard had struck exactly where it would hurt them most. Just before dusk, a knock rattled the door. When I opened it, Celeste stood there, pearls glinting at her neck, perfume hanging in the air like a shield. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Isabel," she purred, stepping lightly toward me. "We've all said things we regret. Families shouldn't fight. Let's resolve this quietly, without dragging strangers into our business." I leaned against the frame, keeping my body between her and the dim apartment behind me. "Strangers? You mean attorneys? Courts?" I asked, my voice steady. Her hand tightened on her designer handbag. The tremor was subtle, but I saw it, her mask cracking. The woman who had smirked as Damien shoved me out of my home now looked brittle, as if the pearls at her throat were strangling instead of adorning. "I only want what's best for Damien," she said quickly. "For all of us. If you'll just sign a few papers." "No." My answer was simple, quiet, and final. I reached for the door. Her smile faltered, eyes flashing something sharp before she dropped her voice to a whisper. "You'll regret this, Isabel." I shut the door, the click of the lock echoing in the silence. My hands should have shaken, but they didn't. Instead, calm spread through me. For the first time in weeks, I felt Richard's shield around me, unbreakable. The phone began buzzing again, vibrating against the counter, and I knew this was only the beginning of their unraveling. Mr. Gaines called me the next morning, his voice careful but edged with urgency. "Isabel, you should understand the full picture. Damien and Celeste have been using estate properties as collateral. They mortgaged large parcels for speculative developments, luxury condos, commercial lots. The projects failed. Without your signature to release additional funds, defaults are imminent. The banks are circling. If word gets out, it won't just be their finances at stake. It will be a public scandal." I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment, the plastic laminate scarred with knife marks from tenants before me, and pressed the phone closer to my ear. So, that was why Celeste had shown up dripping pearls and perfume. They weren't protecting the family. They were protecting themselves. That night, I drove out to the cemetery. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I made my way to Richard's grave, the marble cool under my fingertips. The Vermont hills stretched out in silence, the stars sharp against the sky. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered, my voice catching. "You saw they would betray me. You built the armor I would need." The wind stirred the branches above, and in the hush, I felt less abandoned, less small. The following afternoon, I stepped out of the bakery after my shift, the smell of yeast and sugar clinging to my clothes. Damien was waiting by the curb, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. "Mom," he said, rushing forward. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Please. I messed up. Without you, we're ruined." The man who had once thundered me out of my own home now stood trembling, begging like a child who had broken something he couldn't fix. His words fell heavy, but my heart no longer leapt to rescue. I tightened my coat around me and walked past him, leaving his desperation hanging in the crisp air. The next summons would not come on a street corner, but in a room where none of us could hide. Mr. Gaines arranged the meeting for a gray Thursday morning. His conference room smelled faintly of leather and ink, the long oak table polished to a mirror's shine. I sat at one end, hands folded, Richard's ring heavy on my finger. Damien and Celeste entered together, shoulders squared as if walking into a negotiation they expected to win. Celeste's smile was dazzling, her pearls gleaming under the light. "Isabel?" she began sweetly, settling across from me. "This conflict has gone far enough. We're family. We want what's best for you. We'll support your retirement. Even fund scholarships for the grandchildren, whatever you want. Just sign the necessary authorizations. And we can put all this unpleasantness behind us." Her words slid across the table like oil, but I had come prepared. Without a word, I reached into my folder and slid a document across to Mr. Gaines. He turned it toward them. The forged signature page from the packet Celeste had tried to force on me weeks earlier. Damien leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he read. Then his face drained of color. "What is this?" he muttered. Celeste's voice wavered for the first time. It must be a mistake, a clerical error. You can't think I." But her mask had cracked. I saw the panic she had hidden, the edge of fear slipping through her polished exterior. I straightened in my chair. Richard entrusted me with his legacy. I will not be coerced, manipulated, or threatened. From this day forward, you will resign from managing the family assets. I will oversee them myself, with independent advisors. That is not negotiable." The silence was thick, broken only by the tick of the clock on the wall. Damien rubbed his temples, avoiding my eyes. Celeste's nails clicked against the table as her composure disintegrated. I held my ground, steady and unshaken. For the first time, I felt not like an exile, but like the woman Richard had always believed I could be. The pens lay ready on the table, and I waited for their choice. The room held its breath as the papers were set in front of them. Damien's hands shook as he picked up the pen, his shoulders sagging with the weight of defeat. He signed quickly, almost carelessly, as though getting it over with would lessen the sting. Celeste, however, froze. Her eyes darted to me, then to Mr. Gaines, then back to the pages. "This is absurd," she spat. "You can't expect us to, Mr. Gaines interrupted smoothly, his voice even but firm. "The documents are legally binding. Mrs. Marrow, you may either sign now or face a court process where evidence of forgery will be presented. The choice is yours." Color drained from her face. With a sharp inhale, she snatched the pen and scrawled her name with furious strokes, the ink blotting where her hand pressed too hard. When she dropped the pen, it clattered against the table, final and unforgiving. Their authority vanished in that moment, signed away as cleanly as a debt marked paid. Damien pushed back from the table, eyes downcast, unable to meet mine. Celeste rose abruptly, heels striking the floor in angry staccato. As we stepped out into the corridor, she leaned close, her breath sharp against my ear. "You'll regret this," she hissed, before stalking down the hallway, her perfume trailing bitterness behind her. I trembled for a moment, my body remembering the sting of being thrown out, the ache of humiliation. But then I lifted my chin. I had not won by cruelty. I had won by standing firm. That evening, the phone rang again, this time Mr. Gaines. His tone carried something new respect. "Mrs. Marrow, the board has formally recognized you as majority owner. Several business partners have already requested meetings with you directly. They're eager to work under your leadership." I hung up the phone, staring at my reflection in the window. For the first time since Richard's death, I did not see a discarded widow. I saw a woman rising into her own. The next morning, I packed my suitcase, not to leave in shame, but to return home on my own terms. When I unlocked the front door of the Marrow house again, the air smelled of dust and silence. I stood in the foyer where Damien had once shoved my suitcase out, and for a moment, the memory threatened to hollow me out. But this time, I was not a guest begging for space. I was the rightful owner, returning with purpose. I refused to let the house remain a monument to pain. Walls that once echoed with Richard's voice now echoed with the sound of workers sanding, painting, and repairing. I oversaw every detail, transforming the East Wing into a small community legal clinic, widows seeking advice, single mothers tangled in custody battles, and women facing eviction came through the doors. And for the first time, the house Richard built served more than just our family. It served dignity itself. In his name, I created scholarships for students in environmental studies. Richard had loved the forests he managed, and I wanted others to inherit his passion for stewardship, not just profit. Each acceptance letter we sent carried his name, and I imagined his smile in the rustle of the maples outside the window. Meanwhile, the silence from Damien and Celeste stretched longer with each week. I heard whispers through acquaintances Damien had sold his sports car. Celeste, her collection of designer handbags. They had downsized to a modest condo on the edge of town. Slipping from the high society they had once flaunted, their calls slowed, then dwindled, until there was nothing left but silence. The emptiness they left behind did not hurt me as I thought it might. Instead, the home filled with new voices. Children from the neighborhood gathered in the garden, chasing fireflies and playing games where roses once bloomed. Their laughter carried through open windows, weaving life into every corner. One evening, as I stood on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, I thought of Richard. His foresight had not only preserved my survival, it had given me a path to something greater. The following autumn afternoon, a knock at the door brought the next chapter of that legacy. The knock came on a cool autumn afternoon, just as the maple leaves began to scatter across the porch. I opened the door to find Amara, Damien's 16-year-old daughter, standing there with her arms wrapped tightly around a worn notebook. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, searched mine. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be like them. I want to learn from you." For a long moment I could only stare at her. The granddaughter I had seen only in brief, tense family gatherings. She looked so young and yet so burdened, as though she had carried secrets too heavy for her age. My throat tightened, and I reached out, drawing her inside. We sat together at the kitchen table. She flipped open the notebook to show me sketches of trees, notes about rivers and wildlife, her own ideas for environmental projects at school. Her hands shook as she turned the pages. "Dad says it's a waste of time," she admitted, "but I want to make a difference. Like you." Tears pricked my eyes. My victory was never meant to be about stripping Damien and Celeste of wealth or status. It was here, in the eyes of this girl who wanted a different path, who still believed in something greater than herself. Later that week, I took Amara with me to the lake house. We sat on the porch as the sun sank low, painting the water with streaks of gold. She leaned against me, notebook balanced on her knees, jotting ideas while I listened. I looked out over the water and murmured softly, almost to the wind, "She won't repeat her father's mistakes. Richard, this is the inheritance that matters." The lake shimmered with the last light of day, and I felt at peace. My story had begun with exile, but it ended with promise proof that the truest legacy is not money or control, but the strength to shape the next generation with wisdom.